So welcome to Red Teaming, Going Beyond the Technology. My name is Jason Wood, and I'm a principal security consultant for a penetration testing and security consulting firm named Secure Ideas. I've been doing that now for about 4.5 years. Before that, I came from a background in operations, security engineer, systems administrator, things like that. So that's a little bit of how I approach things. I do training. In fact, I'll be doing a class a little bit later today on Nmap at 1 o'clock. So I'll be standing around with a microphone on quite a bit today, I guess. One of the things I always bring up as well as kind of my background in these presentations, some of the things I like to do to try and give back a little bit to the community, and that's primarily working with junior high and high school kids for myself. I work with this year, 8 Cyber Patriot teams, which is an Air Force program that teaches kids computer security, how to harden systems, find bad things going on a host that they're given, and do some light forensics and networking. And it's a great program. I really enjoy it. Seeing these kids go from knowing how to fire up Word and their video game to by the time some of our seniors have internships working at companies and then go on to get jobs when they graduate or pay their way through college and things like that. So it's a great program. Really enjoy it. This is my 4th year. Actually, we're just starting the season, and so. If you have any interest in something like that, that sounds interesting to you, come talk to me about it because I'd love to tell you more about it. All right. So what do you guys think of when you hear red teaming? What does that mean to you? Anyone? Penetration testing? Okay. That was the way I looked at it. For a long time, that's what I understood red teaming to be. However, penetration testing is not red teaming. It's part of it, though. I mean, it's an important part. I'm not saying that it's not valuable, right? That's what I do for a living. But so often we look at red teaming a little bit narrowly. Red teaming in technology is purely the exercise of having somebody like me, consulting team, come in and trying to break into systems and point out where there are failures, what vulnerabilities are out there, and what were we able to do with them? What access to data did it give us? But really, when I started looking at this, red teaming is a much, much bigger topic. And there's actually a variety of ways that you can red team. They don't have to do with penetration testing. There aren't even necessarily security activities. And that's what I wanted to spend some time talking with you guys about today. There's a lot of different definitions that you'll hear floated around about red teaming. You'll hear alternative analysis as one that I read a lot. Some folks will call it a pre-mortem analysis. So before we're rolling something out, let's try and figure out all the ways this thing can fail or that things could go wrong during whatever the project is. A lot of red teaming is the idea of challenging assumptions. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've sat in a lot of meetings with product development and engineering and project management and whoever else, the business sponsor, and they come out with this idea, hey, this is what we're going to do, and here's how this is going to work, and this is all the benefits. These are all the benefits that we'll get from this, and stuff like that. And never once have I seen anybody go through an exercise of, at least when I was a security engineer, sysadmin, an exercise of, okay, well, how do we know that that's going to happen? How is this? We're making these assumptions on how our customers are going to react to that. Why? Why are they going to react to it that way? And then start running through and start asking questions about that. here's this project that we're going to roll out, and it's going to come out just boom, 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 and we're going to go live on December 1. And you find yourself, coming up on Christmas, working late, trying to get this thing done so you can go home for the holidays, right? Because the project hasn't gone very well. Because nobody really stopped and looked at their assumptions that they had about the project, and looked for areas where problems could occur. Everything was best case scenario. Now, who here has worked on a project that has gone well 100% all the way through, no problems? And that's about my experience. There's always some kind of issue. I mean, we still hit dates and stuff like that, but you experience things that, oh, we didn't think about that. So that's what red teaming is trying to do, or one of the things red teaming tries to avoid, is spot some of these issues before they become full-blown train wrecks. One thing that is a little bit interesting about red teaming, if it's new to folks, is you're going to make people feel really, really uncomfortable. They're going to potentially get defensive. They're going to think that you're attacking them potentially. So, we need to be careful about how we go about it, but, we're going to challenge the idea that this is a good idea, or this is what's going to happen, or this can't happen. This is how we'll handle it when an incident breaks out. Without that process, we really don't know really what's going to happen, or at least have an idea of how the organization is going to react. All right, so I bumped into a bunch of this already. The biggest thing here for red teaming to me is it's a really useful tool that I think is underutilized in IT to avoid screw-ups, to avoid late nights that nobody enjoys working on. So, for example, early in my career, I was in the NOC, I think, junior sysadmin, somewhere around there. And I was looking through our production systems. I was working at a .com. It was all in a Windows-based environment. And I said, hey, I've noticed that none of our Windows systems, none of our servers have antivirus on them at all. Yeah. And I brought this up to the senior sysadmins. What's the deal? Well, performance issues, yada, 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 yada. Well, nobody actually looked at performance issues. It was just an assumption that antivirus was going to add load and the servers couldn't handle it, and that would be a problem. Then we had this little thing called Code Red hit. And that sucker made its way through that data center like a wildfire. Particularly since there were shares all over the place. If you knew a 5-letter password that had multiple repeating letters and stuff like that in, you had domain admin access. So that sucker spread all over the place. It was a nasty, terrible week. The idea of red teaming in that case would have been, all right, let's take a look at this. Antivirus is going to cause too much load on our systems to be bearable by the business. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Take it on, put it on a subset of systems. Oddly enough, after Code Red hit, we had antivirus on all of our systems, and the site continued to perform pretty much the same way it did before. So not a huge surprise there. And another reason why I want to talk about red teaming is we're gonna be talking here for what, 45 minutes or so, and it's a huge topic. So I want to kind of pique some interest in you guys to go out and take a look at some of the resources that are out there. All right, so we're going to use red teaming to test decisions. How is this going to work? Are we going to get the outcomes we expect? Are we going to be able to validate assumptions? Or are we going to invalidate assumptions? We're going to test our effectiveness. One thing that I've sat in on and looked at, for example, is the idea that, hey, we've got a disaster recovery plan. It's enshrined in this nice document over here. It states who's going to talk to who and how things are going to be done and stuff like that. We're set and we're ready for an incident. And then you look around in the whole bit and you quickly realize that the company was not ready for an incident at all. We had something that would help satisfy some of our audits, satisfy some of our clients, but wasn't going to do very much. And so, going through and testing the effectiveness of that plan, testing the people and seeing if they're prepared for it. Are we going to get the outcome that we expect out of it when we have an incident of some sort? And are people really, know what they're supposed to do? And obviously highlight gaps in things like our incident response plan or what have you. All right, so who are the primary users of red teaming? Well, not much of a surprise that the government, Department of Defense, and intelligence agencies are the primary users of red teaming. They use it differently than we do in IT. I mean, they certainly do penetration testing, but they do a lot of other crazy stuff as well. One of the things that I had read about when the government went after bin Laden in Pakistan, they really weren't sure that he was going to be there. And everybody was aware that we had troubles with intelligence and stuff like that after 2003 in the Iraq War. So the intelligence communities, the White House, everybody, the administration, the Obama administration used red teaming extensively at that point. They had actually 3 separate red teams that they ran against it to try and prove or disapprove whether or not he would be there or what the results would be, the outcomes of the operation raid would be. The idea there was to try and avoid the fact that they were reacting to bad intelligence and then go in and invade Pakistan and find out that didn't work. Oddly enough, the SEAL team that went in also red teamed their plan, going in on the ground. So when they crashed that the second helicopter, the plan continued to work because they'd actually trained for that as a contingency. They thought about the idea of what happens as we're landing, one of the machines goes down. So that allowed them to have a better result than just going in blindly at it. Businesses use it a lot of times in the boardrooms to challenge things like strategy, long-term strategy plans. They're usually big, long engagements. Lawyers, the legal industry will use it to game things like litigation outcomes. So they will actually hire in a separate law firm to play the opposing side and try and figure out how things are going to work in their litigation. So those are some of the different places that red teaming is occurring outside of technology itself. All right. We were familiar with the Maginot Line. Okay. That was the result of our experience, everybody's experience in World War I. The French realized that the idea that they could have a conflict with Germany was high, and everybody got to spend lots of time in the dirt and mud and muck and water and stuff like that fighting in World War I. And the French decided, okay, this is a problem, but this is how war is being fought, so we need to be better prepared for this type of war. Now, France, we make fun of the French for World War II a lot, for getting taken over by Germany the way that they did, and the Maginot Line. But France was kind of in a rough position. One, they knew that they couldn't take on the Germans alone. It says here there were 70 million Germans and there were 40 million French people. It doesn't take a lot of math to figure out that you're on the wrong end of that equation. And so they knew that they needed allies to help them out. They had some problems though. The U.S., after taking lots of losses in World War I and and the whole bit, went into kind of an isolationist mode and said, okay, we're done with these European wars. No, thank you very much. We're going to stay home now. And Britain wasn't supporting all of the requirements that had been placed on Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles. So one of the things they had to happen in the Treaty of Versailles was that there was an occupied zone in the Rhineland. And that's where the Allies had troops stationed there as kind of a buffer between France and Germany. And as Germany started making their reparations payments and stuff like that, and started putting political pressure on the English and the Allies to try and to leave the Rhineland, and Britain was dealing with its own economic issues because everybody was having trouble after World War I. Britain didn't support keeping that occupation zone, and they ended up losing that area. So they were in some really sticky, they were in a kind of, France was kind of in a rough spot. They also had an issue of aging military leadership. Now, it wasn't cool to be in the military after World War I. Nobody wanted to do it. So the same generals that were fighting in World War I were now the ones who were going to be fighting in World War II. And this is our result. We came up with the idea of, hey, let's go ahead and we'll build this big, long, fortified wall. And it'll be absolutely impregnable, and it'll keep the Germans out. And now you notice that the strong fortifications go along the border with Germany and France. And we have some very weak fortifications running along with Belgium. The reason why they did it that way, one, it was expensive to build the line, and two, it's kind of hard to put up a massive fortification with your between you and your ally, and play nice in the sandbox with everybody. So they went with weaker fortifications there. And everybody knew, as a fact, the Maginot Line was going to keep Germany out of France again, in the future. They wouldn't be able to get in. That was the assumption. They came up with a plan. They had their expected outcome from it, the benefits they were going to gain. They went out and they implemented it. And they had a few problems along the way. In between World War I and World War II, we got better tanks. They went from ungainly, slow-moving, poorly armed messes to the German Army's excellent tanks that they had. You have now airborne troops, so we can parachute in behind fortifications. That cement wall doesn't matter very much. We fly over it, troops behind you. Mechanized infantry, air power became a big big part of World War II. None of that was any kind of defense of the Maginot Line, or it was anything the Maginot Line was built to defend, and this is the result we ended up with. Germans walking in front of the Eiffel Tower. Now, like I said, we picked fun at them, at the French, for not seeing that Germany would just go through Belgium, that they wouldn't just fly airplanes over it, that they wouldn't put people in gliders, parachutes, and drop them behind the line. Oddly enough, the Maginot Line never fell to the German army. The only time it fell was after the German army was in Paris, and the political establishment in Paris, the government as it fell, ordered the French army to surrender. So the Germans, they made some attacks on it, but they weren't very successful. They had one point, I think, where they were successfully breached it. But overall, it was a great fortification for the last war. But nobody challenged the idea that, hey, what's going to happen? What's going on out there with our adversaries? What are they doing? And how are they approaching things? Are we ready for that? Germany did a lot of war gaming. They did a lot of practicing and training. They were getting ready to go for this lightning war, highly mobile, highly mechanized, and the French weren't. All right, this one is a example actually from my own career. A little bit of a case study where we didn't do red teaming well at all. So we're building a new authentication system for our web application, for our main website. And we had a lot of clients coming to us and asking us, okay, how do you handle authentication, password management, rotation of passwords, history, all that other stuff. And the app it was an old app, really. The infrastructure behind it was pretty legacy. And so we said, okay, we have to roll out this new authentication system to handle things like password changes, things like password history enforcement, account lockouts, et cetera, et cetera. The previous system, had issues where, it didn't store the passwords very securely. They were poorly encrypted. They did all kinds of goofy stuff to do the authentication process. And what we came down to is our business wanted the revenue from these clients. These were actually some pretty big banks. But they didn't want to put any work into it. They didn't want to devote resources to it. What they wanted to devote resources to were new features and functionality within the application. And nobody looks forward to the idea of, hey, I'm authenticating really securely today, if that's what you wanted to look the benefit as. I'm authenticating to a site that has good password management. Nobody cares. Nobody notices. They expect that stuff just kind of happens behind the scenes, right? And so as a result, the business put in the bare minimum of effort. We assigned a fairly junior developer. An architect went through and designed the system, but then they assigned a very junior developer to go and implement it. One of the things that was a problem was the requirements doc stated that there wouldn't be any changes to management tools. So we're going to change our entire password management and authentication system, but we're not going to change any of the tools that we use to manage that system. So, no issues sticking out to you right away there. The architecture was pretty good. What we ended up doing was we decided, okay, we're going to use LDAP as a back-end authentication mechanism. We're not going to write our own user management system. And so the architecture was fine. We were doing things like making sure, okay, we're going to use SSL over LDAP. We're not going to pass this stuff in the clear. We're going to put some good configuration in on what's required and stuff like that. But as a result of the rush to get it done, the person that the junior developer that was assigned to deal with it, everybody that they assigned to the project was completely unfamiliar with LDAP from the development side. So every time they'd assign a new developer to do bug fixes or whatever, I'd have to do LDAP 101. No, it's not a SQL server. It's a different kind of database. And so it was pretty interesting going through it. The problems we had, obviously, we couldn't manage accounts very well. Go figure, we didn't change any of the tools. We had some really significant bugs. So one of my favorite bugs that took months for me to track down was when customer service was creating a new client company. They would create the company, they'd put the users in it. And if they didn't go through an exact flow, like not hitting back, I forget what they did exactly. I guess maybe it was in the same session. There was some bug in the system though where they would go and start creating a second company in their same session that they had just created another company. And what the application would do is rename the OU for the first company and then put all the users for the new company inside of that OU with all the users from the other company. That one took a while to trace down. And it would never crop up because people could authenticate, right, until somebody would go and try and change their password, and the LDAP query would hit to change the password, and guess what? That OU wasn't there, and nobody could find it. So we had to chase that down. Lots of manual work on the systems administration side. I started writing PowerShell scripts to deal with things. It was very frustrating for the clients. It was very frustrating for me. It was very frustrating for customer service. I noticed that the director of product development didn't really care that much, though, because he didn't have to deal with any of this, and it was rolled out. But that was what, the results were. Nobody, and in this case, we didn't have the political ability to challenge it. When we did have questions about it or comments made on it, they were shot down pretty quickly. I remember sitting in one meeting where our director of QA said, well, if all of our clients want the security, why are these security efforts put in place? Why don't we put more effort into this. And somebody rather senior on the business side piped up and said, our customers do not want security. Only Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Wachovia do. And I went, crap, I lost pretty much everything on this project. But that was the attitude that we were taking with it. And it was a self-inflicted injury. We caused lots of problems with clients and stuff like that for no reason other than we didn't want to spend time to plan, to test, and devote some resources to it. And if we'd have sat and talked through this, these issues would have become glaringly evident quickly. And we would have saved months of troubleshooting, frustration, and bug fixes and things like that. We ended up spending the time one way or the other. One was just more expensive and a worse experience, more uncomfortable. All right. So with red teaming, we've decided, okay, you want to take a look at using red teaming in your organization for more things than just a penetration test. You want to red team some projects. One of the things that I think would be really interesting for a red team exercise, our systems administrators are primarily responsible for, or going to be the first line to see that, hey, I think something's odd on the system. It might have some security issues going on here. But being a systems administrator by my background, I spent lots of time learning how to implement things, how to troubleshoot things, how to roll things out and configure them properly and stuff like that, but not a lot of time trying to identify when a system was compromised and what that would even look like. So an interesting red team exercise would be potentially to build, kind of like our Cyber Patriot example here. Here's a virtual machine with some compromised stuff on it. Something's going on this box, simulated. Go find it. And use that as a training exercise for our systems administrators, so that when they're on a box, they have a better chance of saying, hey, wait a minute, this looks familiar to me, or this looks off. Let me see what's going on here. So the things, if you want to do red teaming inside of an organization, you have to have there are some requirements for this. The first thing is that the leadership, the boss, needs to buy into the idea of doing red teaming. I came in at the tail end of the last presentation, and the presenter was talking about how removing administrator rights from systems required support from the top down. Getting legal involved to do the announcement, not have it be an IT project. It's the same thing with red teaming. If it's just us over here in security or IT or audit or whatever saying we want to do red teaming, we're not going to get very much support if the boss doesn't agree that this is a good idea, because we can ignore it, or we can do the bare minimum to get me to be quiet, right, and move on with our day. And there's not going to be any repercussions from it because the boss doesn't care. So you absolutely need to have that buy-in. One of the challenges that we run into is to do red team. It's kind of easy for me in some ways to be a red teamer, like a pen tester. I can come in and kick over all the sacred things inside the organization and poke at things that shouldn't be messed with, because I really don't know that I'm not supposed to mess with them. I just see a vulnerable system or something I can do, and you go after it, right? As long as it's in scope and all that other stuff. One of the challenges that we have for doing red teaming on the inside is we need to be objective at what we're looking at. We can't, let our own biases, and we have them inside of our organizations. I'm sure you could hear some of mine coming out as I talked about the last scenario there. But you want to be objective, kind of take an outsider's view of the situation, the project that you're working on. But you also need to be what it's termed as inside and aware. You're inside the company, you know the relationships, the people, what's important to the organization, what's going to damage or cause problems for the organization. And so you need to know what it is you're testing for. What are the outcomes that would be really bad if this happened? A phrase that I really like for individuals who do red teaming is fearless skeptics with finesse. you have to be willing to poke at the sacred things and say that the emperor's got no clothes or whatever. But you need to do that with some finesse. Walking in and just saying, my boss likes to joke around about the idea that pen testing is a great gig because our job is to come in, tell you your baby is ugly, and then walk out of the room, right? Well, coming in and telling somebody their baby is ugly in those terms doesn't help. That's their pet project. Tell them walking in and saying, well, that sucks. That thing's going to fail all over the place. That's no finesse. You have already lost the other side's interest in anything you have to say. And they're going to be very, very defensive. So we want to be skeptical. We want to be skeptical of what the outcomes, projected outcomes are, the assumptions that are being made. We want to be fearless in the ability to bring up the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but we need to be able to do it in a way that doesn't assign blame, it's not condescending, that doesn't alienate really, as much as we can, those that we're working with inside the organization. Now, there's going through this experience, and the first time you start doing red teaming, people aren't used to it. There's going to be defensive, and this is going to be awkward. But with experience, hopefully as long as we have finesse and the whole bit about how we present things, we'll be able to have people getting the experience. Okay, this isn't a terrible thing. We can actually avoid some pain by doing this. We'll go through a little bit of pain now to avoid a lot of pain later. And that it's not about me attacking whoever this is. And it's not about them being attacked. It's just, hey, we got a problem here or a project or whatever it is. We're just taking a look at it. You want to have a big bag of tricks. So if you're doing red teaming all the time, one of the examples you'll hear is physical penetration testing or physical security assessments. If all you do is hang out by where the smokers are outside the building and tailgate in every single time, people stop listening to you, right? If every time you test a system, you abuse the same flaw over and over again, or do the same kind of thing, people are going to stop listening to you. So you want to break out new and interesting ways of going after things. If the organization is going to do red teaming, it needs to be willing to hear bad news and to be able to act on it. It's nice if culturally we can say, okay, this project has got issues and the whole bit, but if we don't do anything about it, we've just gone into it aware that we're going to have trouble. We haven't really accomplished anything other than maybe some folks are a little less surprised. So we need to act on the results of whatever the red team finds. There's no point in doing red teaming if we're not going to address anything that they found. And then the phrase, red team just enough, but no more. Red teaming can be pretty demoralizing to an organization. I did a penetration test one time where we found what was considered an unimportant system inside of this domain. And so we attacked it. We gained local administrator access over it, but we couldn't pivot out to the domain. We were just limited to this one box, and we didn't have any credentials stored in memory or anything like that, or any password hashes we could get a hold of that were helping us out. So we were kicking this around a little bit. We said, well, we had created an exception on the hard drive for a particular folder saying antivirus don't scan here. And we uploaded all of our attack tools to that directory. Made cleanup really easy. And we realized, well, antivirus is going to stop some of these tools, and those are going to cause alerts. And if we cause enough alerts, we might get a systems administrator to log into the box. Sure, what the heck? So we start copying the file over to the C drive, or the root of the C drive. Antivirus slams it immediately, right? Nothing's happening. Crap. We just caused like 20 alerts on this box and nothing's going on. When we come back from lunch, this is a few hours later, sure enough, somebody had finally logged in to look around, see what was going on. Their credentials were now cached in memory, and we were able to grab that pivot through the organization. To say that the systems administrator felt bad and was a little demoralized by that would be an understatement. We weren't really trying to pick on him, but that's how he felt. Now imagine that experience happening all the dang time. It would be horrible to be on the other end of this. You're just feeling like you're getting beat up all the time. So the idea of this statement, red team just enough, no more, is red team enough to get the benefits that we want out of it, but don't beat people to death over it. Don't demoralize the organization. There are good reasons why we have these projects. There are good reasons why we want to roll out these features in our applications, in our environments, right? We get revenue from it. We get productivity gains, stuff like that. So we want a red team and make sure we're not going to go in blindly to things and find that we've got problems we didn't expect, and major problems at that. But neither do we want to stop it from happening and prevent the organization from gaining the revenue or any of the productivity benefits or what have you that's potentially at stake. On these rules here, actually I pulled from Micah Zenko's book, Red Team, How to Succeed by Thinking Like the Enemy, which is a great book. If you're interested in this, I would highly recommend you taking a read of it or listen to it. I got it on Audible, for example, and listen to it while I mowed the lawn and stuff like that. So it's a fabulous book and really goes over a lot of interesting areas. All right, so inside of IT, how can we use this? So I've already mentioned the idea of doing a pre-mortem analysis of a project plan. Okay, we've got this project plan. How are the ways that this thing can go sideways? What could happen? I mentioned the training simulation for sysadmins. Training, simulating, here's a compromised system or systems. You have a whole set of servers out here that people are looking at, trying to find what's going on. That's a great way to red team and prepare your blue team to actually defend the systems, at least in my opinion. So much of the time, sysadmins are a little surprised at some of the things we do in pen testing. Disaster recovery plans, incident response plans. Those are all ripe for some kind of testing. It was really kind of interesting, first time I had in my first brush with real disaster recovery, to create the plan, go through all the process, make sure we had things being saved the way they were supposed to, and then actually go off site and see how well this worked. And it brought to light some things to the business that they hadn't thought of. The business had heard that, understood that we'll be back up and running at full capacity in 36 hours. Actually, what the plan said was you'll be back up and running at minimal capacity, but kind of functioning in 36 hours. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll get back up to full capacity. And the business was like, oh, wait a minute. That's not what we understood. Our customers can't deal with that. Well, glad we found out during the drill and not during the earthquake that flattened the data center, right? Pen testing we've talked about. Tabletop exercises are really kind of interesting. Now, when I first heard of tabletop exercises, it was actually in regards to disaster recovery, and I sat there and thought, well, that's kind of stupid. How do you know that this is going to really work without going out and testing the system? What in the heck is a tabletop exercise? Go through and see if our plan has gotten gaps. But you know what? As I've gotten some more experience, tabletop exercises are valuable. They're not as expensive necessarily as flying. They can get really expensive, but it's not necessarily. Doesn't have to be as expensive as flying out to your DR data center with the entire team and restoring everything and pulling on several days inside of some loud data center somewhere. Go through and start talking through some of these things. How is this going to be handled? Who's going to be responsible for doing this or that, for restoring that system during an incident? Go through and do a tabletop exercise. Okay, here's how this is going to work. And then we have our documentation on what we're going to do in an incident. Great. Now let's build a scenario, get some people into the room and start talking through this. This takes some discipline and some planning. Good tabletop exercise, because somebody needs to moderate this thing and inject things into it, such as, we got this virus that has gotten loose in our data center, to go back to Code Red that I mentioned a while back. Okay, well, our antivirus will get that. Well, when a few years later, we had antivirus in that environment, NIMDA came out. We didn't have antivirus updates for about 8 hours or so while the AV companies were spinning that up. So how do you handle incident response in that situation? Oh, shoot. And now the ops team has got to figure out how to handle that, right? Or, no, it's going to be all hands all the time till we get this done. Well, somebody's going to need to sleep at some point. So who are you going to send home? How are you going to diminish your capacity but still keep things moving so that people can keep working, through the night and stuff like that to get things, keep things moving towards resolution. You can't just run everybody into the ground. Who here has worked over 24 hours on some kind of outage or incident? Sucks, doesn't it? Driving home after 26 hours of being up and stuff like that and wondering if you're going to go off the road, So that's the idea behind a tabletop exercise. But, like I said, that's going to take some planning. You need to have a scenario. You need to have somebody who's moderating it. That's not, necessarily in ops. They're not necessarily in development. They're not necessarily in product or whatever. They're in the company, but they don't have a huge, they don't feel like their reputation is on the line because they weren't able to restore that system in this period of time. And they can do things like keep things challenged, keep challenging things or doing some injects to keep up in the ante of the exercise. New York PD does their red team exercises, tabletop exercises for different scenarios. And one of their guys who facilitates this says, never let them think you solved the problem. Just keep pushing it. And sometimes they've done it where they found out, okay, yeah, we've overwhelmed the city's capacity to respond. And sometimes we're going to find that in our organizations. We've overwhelmed our ability to respond. Now, what's the likelihood of that happening and all these other things, right? But what do we do to try and mitigate that and be prepared for it? All right. Ways to fail at red teaming. Game or rig the assessment. Now, I don't know about you guys, if you have experience with this, but I've gone into assessments where it was very clear the scope of the assessment was being stacked to get a favorable result. Things were we weren't allowed to test and do. So it really wasn't very useful, honestly. Things were just so limited. Ignoring the results. You had a great pen test, you had a great red team exercise, tabletop exercise, you found some problems and you ignored it and let it ride. Well, that was useless. We just spent a bunch of money and time for no point, right? Don't get upper management support. I mentioned this earlier with the boss needs to buy in. If upper management doesn't support it, everybody can feel free to ignore it and the results of it. One of the mistakes that folks will make is create a red team on an ad hoc basis and just toss people in and say, okay, you go red team this. Well, they don't have any experience or training in it. They haven't had a chance to do anything to prepare. They're not going to do a very good job. And that's not a bad reflection of the person. It's just they don't have the information or the experience. And you got to make sure that they get that. And then red team excessively. Like I said, you don't want to demoralize the organization to the point that we grind things to a halt or we just get ignored. All right, some resources. These are some things that I found useful myself. I already mentioned the book, Red Team, How to Succeed by Thinking Like the Enemy. It's an overview. It covers red teaming across the range of everything from IT, technology, to force-on-force simulations where a red team is invading nuclear power plant, which is not something that I ever want to get near doing. But it's a great intro to the topic. The Red Team Journal, redteamjournal.com, has some really good stuff there. They've got a lot of stuff written up, that articles on different topics that I found useful. They do some interesting training, webinars and stuff like that you can join for free. One of the things I've actually enjoyed is they have a kind of a book club where they pick a book, everybody reads it, and we get on a webinar for a couple hours or an hour or whatever it is to talk about it and what we learned from it. The talking about it is fun in the whole bit for me. Just the idea that these guys are bringing up books I would have never looked at otherwise is really cool and exposes you to some really interesting stuff. And then a book called the Applied Critical Thinking Handbook. And this is from the Department of Defense. This is the red teaming textbook for the military. Just Google it. Like I've got it on the desktop of the system right here. It's just a PDF you can download for free. Another great resource though for learning red teaming. All right, so just kind of wrapping it up. Reasons why I think we need to take a look at red teaming more closely is I think we're underutilizing it. I think we can get more out of it in IT if we look at it as something beyond just a penetration test. If we use it to check out our project plans and test some of our assumptions and things like that before we start working on them, I think there's some real benefits available to us. It'll be hard to prove, though, that the red team exercise caused these benefits to be realized, because really what we're doing is we're avoiding a problem. And so you get to the other side of it and say, well, we didn't have that problem. Was it because the red teaming exercise prevented it, or was it because we didn't have that problem? But I think my experience is that it can point out problems that can really beat you down. And we can apply red teaming to a lot of different situations. And that's probably one of the key things that I took away from my experience and from my reading and stuff like that, is there are so many different ways we can apply this and gain some benefits that I think we're ignoring. And with that, any questions? Sir? So the question was, make sure I understand it right. With the penetration test, we're going out, we're identifying vulnerabilities, the risks that they pose to the organization, but have we considered the idea as pairing that up with an overall assessment of practices, configuration, things that are happening inside the organization, kind of pair it up to try and get some benefit from the two being combined? Okay. Yeah, I personally really like it when I get on an engagement with a client that wants to blend things. My favorite engagements to work on are when I'm doing a penetration test and we're collaborating with the defenders. Because one of the things that gets really interesting is I had a client make a comment one time, and I really loved it, it was really interesting to see where we could see you in the environment and where you disappeared from view. Right? They had certain things that they had visibility into, their procedures, and they had everything, in place to catch. And then there are things that we did that we just disappeared from sight. We've done some engagements where, not as many as I'd like, what we call security architecture reviews, which is that kind of, hey, let's just talk about what you're doing and, go through procedures and how well things are working and where there might be some gaps. The problem that I found is most of our clients want to separate those two. But I think there could definitely be some benefit to it. One of the things you look at it with a penetration test or a red teaming exercise is, what are you hoping to gain out of this, right? Well, with a penetration test, usually the goal is, hey, we want to find out what can be done, what flaws we have and what can be done with them. Have somebody tell us about it and how to fix it, or give us some recommendations on how to fix it without having a breach. If we go into it with that mindset, that's our goal, then it opens up much more opportunities for collaboration, because the goal is not to beat the red team, even though it's nice to know our defenses are doing well. It is to find out about the overall health and security of the environment and our practices and procedures. So yeah, I think there's some real benefit to doing that, to blending the two. From the consulting side, it just depends on what the client wants and what they're willing to pay. It does add some time to it to go through that process, so the cost of the engagement does go up just due to the time. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, yes, sir. So I couldn't hear all of the question. Sorry. So the question was, is for a company that just has internal security and internal security testing going on, where would I suggest that they start red teaming? Now, are you saying that for particularly from a security perspective of red teaming, or just in general? Really, I would look at it from the standpoint of, goodness, I mean, that's a pretty big question. What's important to the organization at that point? That's one of the first questions I'd start asking. What's important to you? What's the business? What could be disruptive? What do we have going on or changing that needs to be looked at? Do we have some kind of big project that we're about to kick off, right? That's something to start looking at red teaming. If we don't have a huge amount of things happening, maybe we just start, okay, we're going to start picking on, let's say, taking a look at from the external. We'll just start out with some vulnerability assessments, see what we find there, and then just step it up. One of the things I do recommend to folks is we'll get some clients that will say, hey, we want to do a penetration test. We want to surprise the defenders, the blue team, a sysadmin. So we're not going to tell them about it. And if they don't have a lot of experience with pen testing, with red teaming or whatnot, it's kind of a waste of time because all the sysadmins do is feel beat up and attacked. If your goal is to prove that, gee, they can't find us, they can't see the red team. If you haven't done it before, then you can kind of just assume that that's going to be the case. But I would start small, but I would look at things like what's the overall, what are the real risks to the organization, start focus on some big ones there. Do we have a big project that's something significant is at stake? Focus on that. And then, start picking out our weaknesses. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. My email address is up here. Also my Twitter handle if you want to get a hold of me there. I'll be around all day today. Feel free to come up and talk with me afterwards. And I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you very much.